Hi, my name is Mark. I'm going to chat to you about developing Japanese black pine from seed. So over here we have a couple of trees that were planted in September last year, 2017, so they're 1 year and 5 months old. All 5 of these were planted at the same time, and I'd like to just compare the difference between planting a seed in a standard pot, plastic pot, versus planting a seed in, for example, a colander, which has a ton of drainage, which allows air, water, fertilizer to pass through freely, and also prevents your roots from coiling around the bottom of the pot, ongoing forever. So what happens is the roots reach the end of the colander, they poke through the little holes, they stop growing, and then new roots are issued further back along that root system. So you end up with a very fibrous, fine root system, which is much more efficient than long running roots. We have different methods of treating roots once the seedlings have germinated, sprouted and start to grow. We can either remove them from the seed flat and pot up as is into little containers, or we can root prune them, just a basic short root prune, which I've done with most of my trees. Or another method is whereby you cut the roots off completely at the stem at a certain time in the growing season, which supposedly gives you a lot more branching lower down on the stem and develops a much shorter trunk as well, especially for shohin or mami sized trees. That method is used quite often in Japan. There are a lot of things that you can do experiment wise. You could do exposed root plantings whereby you remove a rooted seedling from a container, dangle the roots down and insert them into a container of sorts, or a cylinder, so that the tips enter the soil, and develop the tree this way for a couple of years, and then you simply remove the cylinder and you have a set of exposed or hanging roots. You can also double up and go with a bit of a cascade style. One of the options when potting up from seedling is to do a complete root cutting, where you cut all the roots off across the stem, versus leaving the roots intact and simply just pruning the roots. So, for example, this seedling was not completely root pruned, so the roots were left intact, and you get quite a long elongation of the stem before you get any growth or the possibility of branching or new buds developing. As you can see, you've got quite a long, we call it an internode even, a long piece of stem before you get the possibility of branching. Whereas if you do a root cutting and you completely cut all the roots off across the stem, you get branching developing right down as close as possible to the soil line, which is beneficial when you want to create shohin or mami sized pine bonsai. I'd like to discuss a little bit of the soil composition, fertilization and placement of the trees. I use a very free draining soil mixture, which is made up of pretty much equal parts of akadama, pumice, as well as bonsai trees, the professional mix. This provides excellent drainage, and it also retains quite a bit of moisture because of the akadama, which is very porous. The akadama also takes up a lot of the nutrition from the fertilizer and releases it to the plant as and when required. This tree is 1 year and 5 months old, and you can see it is quite substantial for a 1.5 year old pine seedling. And I think due to the fact that it's planted in a colander with a lot of drainage, it speeds up the growth rate of the tree. This tree over here, planted in the same mixture of soil, was planted in 20 2015, so it's going on almost 4 years, 3.5 to 4 years old, and you can see it has quite substantial growth at the base. I have some nice low branches that I'll be developing as I let the leader grow as a sacrifice branch. Positioning: pines love full sun and preferably lots of wind. The more wind and the more sun the tree has, the more it's going to transpire, and the more it transpires through the needles, the more resources are transported to those tips, and the stronger growth you will achieve. Okay, let's talk a bit about wiring, initial wiring of your seedlings. If your aim is to create a slender tree with a little bit of shape and movement, then I would suggest that you apply your wire within a year to a year and a half of from planting from seed, like I've done with this little chap over here. It already has wire on for 2 months, and it's already starting to bite in, so it's pretty much time to remove the wire. And if the shape holds, then it wouldn't be necessary to reapply the wire. But if the shape doesn't hold and it bounces back, then you can always reapply the wire, being careful not to insert the wire along the same path as it previously was, whilst the wire bite would just continue to worsen. If your aim is to create a much larger tree with fat girth and a huge base, then there'd almost be no reason to wire initially. I'd suggest that you plant the tree at an angle, just at an angle within the pot, and let the leader grow as a sacrifice branch, and until your base is thick enough. And at the same time, in order to encourage lower branches, if you just let the leader grow, it's all going to end up at the tip and not at the base where you want lower branches. So for example, with this tree here, I have the leader growing, which is contributing to the girth at the bottom of the tree, but I'd also like to retain lower branches and start to develop them. And you can develop lower branches by pruning in order to get ramification, splitting from 1 becomes 2, 2 becomes 4, 4 to 8, etc., etc. But you need to do that in the early stage of development in order to get branching that is proportionate to the size of the base. And something to remember as well is when you are trying to develop lower branches while developing the base of the tree, you need to not shade out those lower branches. So basically just clean off all the needles directly above the branching that you are trying to develop. And pruning you would do at the same time as you would generally decandle your pines in order to get a second flush. So that would be, for us in the southern hemisphere, sometime in end of this, well, beginning to mid-December works well for me. So these branches were pruned on the 1st of December this year, and at every prune site I have at least 2 or 3 new shoots that have developed. Once those shoots have hardened off in autumn, then we select 2 lateral buds and remove everything else at that cut site. So the one branch eventually splits into 2 or ramifies into 2. Okay, regarding fertilization for pines, especially when growing in colanders, it's best to fertilize very aggressively. I use Bonsai Boost from Bonsai Tree, as well as Bio Ocean, which is basically chicken manure, as well as some kelp and fish meal. Yeah, so we replace the Bonsai Boost every 2 to 3 weeks, but I tend to leave them on the soil because there are some micro elements that still get released into the soil. The Bio Ocean, as and when required, you very quickly see when they're not, they're not really effective once they've dried out. Okay, and then colander selection, size-wise. If you are going to plant a tiny little seedling like this into a colander this size, you are going to promote root rot because the soil is going to constantly remain wet. You're going to use far too much water. Every time you water, you're going to waste a litre of water with each application. You're going to try and fertilize way too much, so it's just going to be a waste. Best to select the appropriate sized colander. For example, start them off in something small like that, lots of drainage. Alternatively, use these little chaps. I think they're used as either pond baskets or hydroponic, for hydroponics, growing hydroponics. Once they've grown for a year or two even, I'd suggest that you pot them up into something along the lines of this size. Once it sort of outgrows this, you can progress to a slightly larger size, basically simply lifting the whole tree, soil and all out, popping it into a slightly larger colander and just filling all around at the bottom with new soil. Key is not to disturb the roots.